All right. Hello, and thank you for coming. I'm going to be talking about the title is Blink Code Complexity Survey. So I'm Jeremy from the Platform Architecture team, and I'm going to be focusing on the results of a survey that we recently sent to Blink Dev in March about our code complexity and what makes working on Blink hard. This is nice because it means that most of the words on the slides I didn't have to write because other people wrote them for me. So this is the email I sent to BlinkDev, which I'm sure you're all subscribed to, asking you to tell us what slows you down while developing web platform code in Chromium. We got 38 responses, summarizing what follows. Some of the comments are positive, and some are somewhat less so. So the first question we asked is, how often are you hindered by technical debt or overly complicated code? A question that's sort of inspired by an internal survey we did. First thing you'll note is that there's this very light blue color labeled never that has no bar. Nobody is never hindered by technical debt or overly complicated code. And in fact, 68% are hindered either often or very often. So clearly, this is a subject of great interest. Then we asked, what types of technical debt or complexity issues frequently hinder your work in or around Blink? We got 37 responses to this. One person didn't answer this question. And the number one thing here is the thing that we've heard before. 78% of respondents reported being hindered by missing documentation. This is a concern that we've heard in the past. But it's clear that we as a project still have more work to do here. And not only are we missing documentation, but 38% of you reported that the documentation we do have can be wrong or outdated. So if there's something that's worse than no documentation, it's wrong documentation. The next most popular item was 46% of you reported being hindered by class structure and hierarchy. And this, is just sort of the way the code is structured and the way it's organized. And this outweighs sort of some of the sort of classic problems in software engineering. Things like memory management, threading, scheduling, IPC, those are all easy compared to class structure and hierarchy. Then we asked, what parts of Chromium have debt or complexity that slow you down? Where is this complexity? We got 36 responses. The number one part of Blink with complexity that slows developers down is our core rendering code, according to survey respondents. I think many of you will agree that this is some of the trickier and more subtle code around, in part because of the complexity the CSS specification requires of us. Nonetheless, there are efforts underway in the relevant subteams making this code more rational, like layout NG. You also report being slowed down by platform and WTF. We're in the process of trying to make at least, especially WTF, somewhat smaller. So hopefully it'll slow you down less, or if not, it'll be a higher density of slowing you down. Then we see some of the other areas that frequently come up. Frames and navigation continue to be complicated. Graphics, layout test and layout test infrastructure, the browser side code and content, OilPan GC, overall organization and layering, and JavaScript bindings. There's a long tail beyond there that I didn't want to fit on this slide because I wanted the text to be legible. So we also asked you for some comments in your own words. We collected survey responses anonymously, so we're unable to share who said what. It's for your own protection. We asked you to explain in more detail what slows you down when working on the web platform, and to give us advice about how your pain points should be addressed. Unsurprisingly, given the results on the previous couple slides, the most popular topic of these comments was documentation. So I'm basically just going to be reading what people told us. So one person said, a lot of our systems, like layout and style, are incredibly complicated with very little documentation. Someone said, it's a nightmare. Compile errors, unhelpful test error messages. I'm often left guessing, trial and erroring, and copying existing code to figure out how to do things. I try to find documentation, but still often have to ask others for help. The prevalence in Blink of conditional statements that check for something, like some property of an object that do something different from the object, with no comment to say why things should be that way. You might be like hearing your internal monologue here. Many header files lack a basic this does what comment, and web IDL and bindings are unevenly documented, I find myself blindly copying existing code or reading generated code in code search in order to work out what I need to do. Incorrect assumptions and breaking invariants in other parts of the code, undocumented invariants, and unit tests for undocumented classes and methods with bad names where what the unit tests test is incomprehensible. What does slow me down in existing code is lack of documentation. This person says we need a documentation sheriff whose job is to document answers. Do I have any volunteers? This comment I actually found sort of concerning from a culture perspective. The person says, I feel like there's a kind of machismo in Blink underlying the lack of comments, undisciplined use of inheritance, not invented here code style, and thread hostile data structures. The overall message seems to be, if you can't deal with it, you're not good enough to code in Blink. I think the first step to changing this culture is to acknowledge it. And so I certainly hope that there aren't a lot of people who feel this way because, yes?
When I see this, I remember back from before the WebKit fork, where the WebKit culture was don't comment. It should be absolutely self-explanatory. So I think the number one step was doing the fork and changing that. But while we inherited that culture in terms of the code itself, that is definitely something that indeed I do hope we can move up from.
Yeah, agreed. Because I know this is one of the things that since the fork we've been working on changing, and we're what 5 years on now since the fork, so it's clearly not done. This person says update documentation and more specific examples of how to use threading, task scheduling, or RPC would help. Person says comprehensive documentation that included more context and links to other helpful resources for those new to Blink, Chromium, and C++ to actually understand things would be amazing. So a lot of comments and documentation. We also got a lot of comments about the structure of our code base. This person says, going through the Blink content barrier is always painful because of the use of different types on each side and the strange no man's land in the middle where neither set of types is appropriate. I'm sure we can all sympathize with this one. Someone said, currently code structure designs seem to create strong black boxes that prohibit or scare people away from code designs to taking advantage of existing code. Call it miscellaneous, util, helpers, don't care what, but right now people are forced into copy-paste programming. Person said, adequately invest in keeping architecture and layering sane. Focus on big picture, at least as much as renaming classes and formatting. But we know how much you love us when we just reformat all your code. Interfacing between Blink and Chromer components is a real battle with abstraction layers. So there you have, today you have to go not through one API barrier, but two of them often. Logical entities are hard to locate due to complex code organization. Much of this complexity is added to support unit testing. So this person, finds this difficult to locate. Too much inheritance of implementation and multiple inheritance. It can be tricky to figure out which implementation of a method actually matters. Multiple inheritance interacts badly with OilPan. Unclear and undocumented contracts around many classes. Habit of calling from core to core when you need it makes reasoning about things very hard. We also heard from you about our development process, including code reviews and code ownership. Person says, working sometimes takes ages to get people to review contributions. Perennial problem. It's definitely not one we're over. This person says we should have more experienced engineers that understand layering involved. The platform architecture team is doing a great job. Thank you. But having more eyes there would help. Having greater exposure to L6 to L8 individual contributors and tech leads could have prevented web versus core exported merge mistakes. Refactoring of the Mojo service layer should include a design document and or public discussion. Commits related to the refactoring should link a bug report with the document and discussion. Code ownership in Blink itself is not usually a problem. Well, that's good. But rules in Chrome are convoluted, and automated tools frequently give the wrong answers. Finally, we got a number of comments about testing. Person says, one of the biggest slowdowns is figuring out how to write test code that depends on the communication and scheduling of many threads involved and data transformations between them. Top issue, there is not a good way to unit test much of our code base. For example, there's no unit test framework that lets you test the CC blink boundary. Person says perhaps a version of rendering tests can be created, which sets up more of the plumbing and access to various components. Unit tests are very time-consuming to add where a feature lacks existing tests. Yes, we have a few of those areas. We also shared with you at the end of the survey a summary of what we're working on as part of the code architecture effort within the platform architecture team. And then we asked for your feedback about what we're working on. So there are 3 main Blink code architecture efforts we asked you about. The first was Onion Soup, which is our effort to move the render implementation of the web platform from content render into Blink and remove Blink public API abstraction classes. We asked about the Blink Chromium unification, which is reducing differences between Blink and Chromium style and removing duplication between base and WTF, although some of that's likely to remain, so that you can write code in Blink and write code in Chromium and go back and forth easily. Blink layering, which is the layering within Blink. So trimming core modules exported, clarifying dependencies between directories in Blink, examining patterns for building well-layered features, how to call cleanly between core and modules, and so on. And the light blue color that you don't see there is don't, know, or indifferent. So you can more or less sort of set that aside. And broadly, you support these priorities. All of these have at least 67% support from respondents, with unifying Chromium and Blink style and libraries being the most popular at 81%. There's a few people who oppose one or more of these projects, but not very many. Yes?
Were we targeting Blink contributors or Chromium?
This was sent to Blink Dev. It's targeted at people who contribute to Blink. It's as the boundary sort of blurs, there are some people who contribute to Blink infrequently and so on, but we asked, what should the platform architecture team do to reduce technical debt and code complexity in Blink? And one of the responses was finally get rid of third-party WebKit. Well, thanks to T-Kent, that's almost done now. So we finally got rid of third-party WebKit. And this person says, if it's restructured or remove, make sure to shorten the path from third-party WebKit source to something short like engine or Blink. Well, I'd like to apologize because the new path is third-party Blink render, which is actually 1 character longer. This person's pretty happy with our process. Kudos to the platform architecture team for their open process in approaching the Blink refactoring efforts. Teams refactoring Chromium subsystems should take your example and follow a similarly open approach. And this person is less positive. I feel like the platform architecture team did not have a strong direction supported by senior engineers, which have an understanding of the existing picture and history, and were just pursuing random goals for a while, churn without clear benefits, bypassing owners of the changing code. So that's everything that I have as far as slides goes. Thank you for your attention. I would love to have any questions or comments that people have about this, and maybe this can start a discussion about how we can move forward with our code architecture. I wish I had microphones.
Hi folks, I'm Aaron Gable. I don't work on Blink. I work on Chrome operations structure. Just spent a while talking about documentation problems in Blink. Maybe there's a code structure problem there. Maybe there's a culture problem there. Seems to me that there's obviously a tooling problem there as well. And so I would like to talk to people, not necessarily right now, because I don't want to derail the entire comments, but find me, maybe I'll do like a breakout session during the next time period, but I want to talk about ways in which Chrome operations can provide better tools for keeping documentation up to date. Edited documentation is easily submitting documentation CLs, rendering markdown, providing templates that you need to format documentation the way you want, stuff like that. So find me, talk to me, documentation.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. If not, then this is going to be one of the shorter presentations. But thank you very much for your time, and I hope that this at least starts you thinking about where we can do better with our architecture.